Hi everyone, I'm Matt from THKP, and today we're going to recreate the Explore page from the Google Podcasts app in Flutter. Now you might think that this page is fairly simple, and as a user it is, but there's actually quite a bit of complexity if you think about what's going on. So we have the ability to scroll on the page. We also have the ability to tab left and right. Also, we can swipe from one tab to the next. And we have this interesting behavior with the top bar where we have kind of an extended app bar that when you scroll down on the page, it collapses to a point. So we're going to take a look at how we can build all of this in Flutter. So we have a little bit of code that we're starting with, mostly just a little bit of structure where we have a pager for the other pages of the app, the home page, the Explore page. Let's start running this and see what we're working with. Okay, so as you can see, we already have some stuff built up. So we've got this ability to make a swipeable list of podcast covers. These are just colored squircles for right now. And we have a handle to make a podcast episode, quote unquote, which has the podcast title with the cover, the title of the episode, a description of the episode, and then the play, add to playlist, and download icons. So I'm not going to go into detail in this video about how to build those up. These are fairly straightforward combinations of rows, columns, and paddings. Not that much fanciness going on here. Maybe a rounded rectangle border or two. But the purpose of this video is really to go into how to get if we switch back to podcasts, how to get this nice header scrolling behavior. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So if we go over to Explore though, we can see we don't have anything. So first, let's start to add some content, just some of this similar dummy podcast content. So let's change this container into a column. So we have this utility get episode row. And this accepts a color, which just controls the color of the little icon. So let's just say this is colors.red. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, so we can see our dummy podcast episode. Let's add a few more of these, just so we can start to get some scrollable content. Okay, so now we have content that's longer than the screen, but our column is just expanding to contain all of the height here. So we will change this to a list view, which will handle implementing the scroll for us. And now we've got this scrollable content, but we want an app bar. So let's add that to the top here, and instead of just having a bare list view, we're actually going to wrap this in a scaffold. Scaffold likes to call its child body. I guess it's because it has a couple of widgets in it. So, and then in addition, Scaffold has an app bar, and then we want to say this is an app bar. And let's see how that looks. Okay, so we still have our scrollable list view, but our app bar doesn't have anything in it. We'll add the Explorer title. Okay, but this should be centered. Just a handy center title bool here. If you are in a context where you could cast a podcast, there is a cast logo on the left side, so we'll add that. That's controlled by something called leading. Okay, and then let's go back quickly. And then we also have a little user icon in the upper right-hand corner, and the right-hand corner is referred to as actions, so which is just a list of widgets, and we'll add that there. And Flutter has a handy utility called Circle Avatar, which we'll use. And there's a background image here. and we just have a local asset. All right, so we got our little user there, but it looks like there's a little bit of padding in the real app, just so it doesn't touch right against the wall. So we will add a padding around that. The default value of 8 will be fine for these purposes. Okay, so now we got kind of a balanced looking app bar. The problem, of course, is that it's blue instead of white, so we can switch the background color to white. Okay. As expected, our font has disappeared, and AppBar accepts a text theme. So if you're not familiar, themes are kind of a way to unify styles across sections of your app. So I recommend looking into and using them in your app, because it'll just wind up with kind of less headache trying to keep your styles in sync across different parts of your app. So we will grab the theme data off of our context, and then the text theme is theme.texttheme. Okay, so we are seeing our Explorer text show up now. And then icons accept a color, so we can just say, okay, theme.texttheme. And there's a series of different text styles that you can define in a text theme. I happen to know that for an app bar, it will use headline 6 to define the font for that header there. So, and we will just say .color. So that should show up now. All right, so if we compare side by side, at least just in the case of that top header, we're really close. And I'm not gonna use Google's font, technically, that's their own proprietary font, so I'm just gonna stick with the default built-in. But we are getting close to just kind of a vanilla AppBar implementation. So we've got our scrollable content and we've got our little white AppBar correctly configured there. So I think for the next phase, we will add the ability for this AppBar to kind of float in and out. So right, if we look back, this AppBar kind of scrolls away, and then when we scroll down, it scrolls along with our scroll. So we want to add that functionality to our app. So the first step will be to make it so that this AppBar disappears and then reappears when we scroll down again. But it may seem like we are pretty close to getting an AppBar that can hide and show, but we're actually going to need to make some pretty significant changes to the way this page is currently structured. So instead of a scaffold, we're going to have to use a custom scroll view. So custom scroll view is a wrapper around a list of slivers, and a sliver is a lower level scrollable area that Flutter makes available to you. And so in our case, our custom scroll view is going to have a list of slivers. The top sliver is going to be our app bar, but instead of a vanilla app bar, it's going to be a SliverAppBar, which is what allows it to exist in the list, because everything in the custom scroll view list has to be a sliver. And now, instead of a body, because custom scroll view does not accept a body, we are just going to have these children literally inside of our list. But we need to wrap them in a sliver list before we can use them, because they are not slivers themselves. Hold on. Okay, and now sliver list accepts a delegate, which allows you to have kind of very fine-grained control about the behavior of a sliver list. But in our case, we just want to pass in a static list, which actually, in our case, there's a utility function which apparently gives better performance if in the case that your list of children won't change. So we can use .fixed. instead of just the original version. Okay, we'll get rid of this whole body. This is happening because I literally just said this. This is the error that you get. So I definitely meant to do this. This is a teaching moment. This is what happens when you try to use an AppBar instead of a SliverAppBar. Okay, and now if we fully refresh. Okay. Lovely. So our app is unbroken again, and now we have our app bar that slides along with our content, but that's not exactly the behavior we want. We want to say floating : true gets us closer to the behavior that we want, where we scroll down and we see, even though we're deep into the list, our app bar peeks back in for us. So there you have it. So that is how you get this floating app bar behavior. So one of the other things that the real Google Podcast app allows you to do is switch between various tabs that have different content. Let's start to add that functionality. So we'll switch back. And so we have two parts when we have tabbed behavior typically, or three parts really. We have a tab bar, which actually has kind of the names of the tabs, which is what we see at the top here. And then we actually have the corresponding content. So this content in the middle here, the middle of the page, which is called the TabBarView. Finally, we're going to need to connect our TabBar and TabBarView together because these elements can be arbitrarily nested in the widget tree. There's a couple of different ways to do this, but one of the more explicit ways, the way that I prefer actually, is to have a tab controller in your stateful widget. You pass it into the TabBar, you pass it into the TabBarView, and that makes sure that when you tap a new tab on the TabBar, the TabBarView correspondingly switches, and vice versa. If I swipe on this center part, we see that the TabBar and the TabBarView are intrinsically interlinked. So let's start to add that. So we will add a TabBar. And there is a useful piece of configuration called bottom on an AppBar. And we will add our TabBar there. And as mentioned, we have our tab controller. This is just something we've initialized before, just as a heads up where this TC that I reference is coming from. So we'll set the controller. And then there's tabs. Actually, I think this is set to 5, which is the number of tabs that it is, but we want this to be 10 for reasons we'll see soon. It's complaining because our tabs are not configured correctly. That's okay. We will get there soon. I'm just going to use lorem ipsum, which is what we've been doing all over this app. All right, so now we have our tabs, but we cannot see them because the configured color for these things is white, so that for the label. But that is configurable, so we will say label color. And this actually gets us back to our point before about themes. We're going to steal the color for these labels off of our theme. And then in our case, we will use body text too. To a certain extent, these, you can kind of decide how you want to use these. In my case, I've kind of decided one example of what we use body text to for is the labels on our tab bar. So there's also a label style. And this is the same as the other one. We'll say text theme dot body text 2. Okay, and it's jamming all of the tabs in there, but we have a way to fix that. We can say is scrollable as true, and then it'll allow them to be their real width. Next, we will say that we want this is kind of a subtler detail, but if you notice, this blue bar is extending the full width of the tab. But if we look back at the podcast app, it's just underneath the words for it. So we are going to do that, and there's an easy configuration for this. So we can say label, this is indicator size. Tab bar indicator size. I always have it's a challenge to remember the name of that on the first try. So now we see that our indicator is the right size. We also want the color of the label to be different. So there's label color, but there's also unselected label color. And so we're actually gonna take this and use this for our unselected label color. And then this kind of is just the selected label color, and we'll say theme.primary color. And that'll be that kind of classic blue. And there you go. So now we have a configured app bar. Nothing's hooked into it just yet, but technically we are issuing commands to our tab controller. And so now for the next part, we need to make it so that we have tabbed content to switch between. So let's add this. And you might be thinking, oh, okay, we'll just be able to add a TabBarView to this sliver child list delegate. But that won't work for us. And let's just do that, and then we'll see the error that we get. So we'll say TabBarView. And here we're just going to use a convenience function we've defined above, and we'll call that get tab contents. And we're going to need to do this 10 times. Okay, so we are getting this error because it's finding some other tab controller somewhere else, potentially from this bottom tab, Home, Explorer, Activity. And this is kind of one of the reasons why I like to use an explicit controller, so that it doesn't just try to do something magical for you. So let's fix that. And then now we should see the real error, which is that we actually need to break into the terminal to see this. We'll show the debug console. And we see that the render box was not laid out. And this can kind of be a mysterious issue, but we see that this is related to the TabBarView. And in our case, this sliver child list delegate needs to have sized children, and the TabBarView doesn't have a size. So we're not allowed to put it into this sliver list. And the resolution to this problem is actually, if you can believe it, we're gonna change the fundamental structure of this page just one more time. And instead of using a custom scroll view, we will use a nested scroll view. And in some ways, this is actually more similar to the original Scaffold, where we have kind of an explicitly defined app bar and a body. So in our case, instead of it being an app bar, we have a header sliver builder. And this is a function that accepts the build context and a Boolean, but we are not going to use it, so we'll just use an underscore. And we are going to move this sliver list down below. Cool. And then for right now, we're going to call this body, and then we'll say this. We're not going to need that sliver list, but this is just allows us to keep the structure of our app clean. So now we've got this header sliver builder, which returns a list of widgets, of which there's only one. It's just the SliverAppBar for right now. And now we just want to put the TabBarView directly into the body. So we'll have to remove this sliver list. And then we get to unnecessary. Okay. Very good. So now we've got our correctly configured nested scroll view. And let's see how this looks. And now our app seems to be working pretty well. So now we have these swipeable tabs and we can control them from up there. They're using a shared controller. We can scroll up and down, and now actually you can see we also have this nice kind of side swipeable or horizontally swipeable. Side swipe is probably not the right term. And which is starting to look quite similar to the real thing. And that is the solution for our problem of not being able to put the TabBar view into the sliver list. All right, so we're really getting down to the final stretches of our Explore page clone. The next thing I want to address is the fact that our tabs are not sticking at the top of the app. So if we go back to the real thing, we see that this app bar contracts to a point, but then at the end, the tabs always stick around no matter how far you scroll. So ours is not doing that right now. So the resolution to this is pretty simple. If we just set pinned to true, we should get this behavior. And there we go. So we see our floating tab bar. And now the last big thing that we are missing is the search bar. Again, let's do a quick look. So we've got our search bar here. And we will need to do a little bit of reshuffling to get that. So right now, our SliverAppBar is responsible for drawing Explorer, for drawing the user avatar, the cast icon. We're actually going to need to throw some of that functionality away. There's this idea of a flexible space. And this allows you to define kind of if there's additional space, if the header is taller, which we control by this expanded height. Flexible space defines what that additional space is used for. So here we go. Now we just have additional blank space. And the kind of easiest way I found to utilize the space is actually, so we say flexible space, and then flexible space bar, and now there's a background, which is just a widget, and we're going to make this a column. So let's first just try putting an input here, a form field input. Text form field. And the problem is that it lives up at the top. I'm going to add a little padding here. Yeah, so this is getting pushed all the way up to the very top of the space, which is not really what we are looking for. We want it to be underneath the app bar. So instead of having the SliverAppBar be responsible for drawing Explorer and all that stuff, we'll actually just put all of that stuff into the flexible space bar with just a kind of a vanilla app bar. So we'll need to do a little bit of reshuffling. Okay, so that looks pretty terrible, but we are going to improve it some more. Oh, okay, so we have our padding around our flexible space bar, which is not what we want. Let's just remove this padding from here, and then we'll add it here. Okay, so that looks only slightly less terrible as before. So I'll just fast forward some of this, just like copying over these attributes. That's all the same as they were before, but we just need them to be in this new inner app bar inside the flexible space as opposed to the outer SliverAppBar. Okay, so we've got all the content that we expect, but we have a double elevation issue here. So we're just going to set our elevation on the inner app bar to 0 so that it doesn't give us this double shadow problem. And now we're very close, but this text form field is not doing the right thing, or it just isn't decorated the right way. So I'm going to add some text decoration just so that it follows the same style here. There's a kind of a rounded rectangle outside of the whole thing. So okay, so a lot of just finicky details here, but nothing too crazy. So we add a prefix icon, that's just the search icon. We add the search text, and we add a border, and we set it to be a light gray, and the border radius is 10. So if we save, and now we can see our search bar. And actually we have one minor thing. Our search bar is like a little bit chunky. So there's just a little bit too much padding inside here. So there's a setting on input decoration called content padding. And then we can just say padding, or edge insets, excuse me. And I've found 4 is closer to what they're working with there to give kind of a tighter catch around the text. Okay, so we have our nice search bar, but if we scroll up, we see that the behavior is not at all what we want it to do, or it doesn't match the behavior that at least I expected. So it just kind of does this weird like fade, which is not what we want. And we can control this with our FlexibleSpaceBar, and then there's a collapse mode, and then we want pin. And now we get the behavior that we're looking for. The very last problem that we need to solve is that when we scroll up and then try to scroll down again, we don't get the kind of floating behavior where the bar extends from any point along the scroll. We have to scroll all the way back up. But that's not how the Google Podcasts app behaves. Just to demonstrate, as we see, we don't need to scroll all the way back to extend the app bar. So let's go back here. There's actually a very simple solution to this. We can set float header slivers to true. And just a note, you will need to restart your app for reasons that are not entirely clear to me, actually. If you restart your app, you should see the float slivers behavior. I guess there's something with state somewhere along the way that grabs onto that. So, but here we have it. So now we are seeing a very similar behavior to the official Google Podcasts app, where we have this tabified scrolling view, and we can swap, we can swipe to the side. We have all these tabs, and we can scroll, and we have the sticky tab header. All right, thanks so much for sticking along with me and taking a journey into the weird world of Flutter slivers, and keep an eye out for future THKP videos. Thanks for checking out this tutorial. If you found this useful, give us a thumbs up, and if you're interested in seeing more, don't hesitate to subscribe.